Well, welcome to the Swiss Chamber of Commercial Mediation B2B practice group workshop on how to make negotiations more successful through mediation. My name is Jean-Christophe Barth, and I have the pleasure to help moderate this session today. Today, we have two very special people with us who will share their insights. First, Dr. Ulrich Hagel, who will present himself in a second, and Mirela Creder. I'm very pleased that they both are making time in their busy schedules to share their wisdom with us, and maybe a couple of organizational things up front. We want this to be interactive, and so please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat. If time allows, we'll also give you the possibility to elevate you to speak and take the floor to say something for that. We plan to also do a short breakout session to allow a bit of collaborative work. And I think we won't make the introduction very long. Just, yeah, enjoy this time together. I think it's quality time we can have. It's a really important topic on because everybody negotiates all the time, and I hope that at the end of our workshop we'll all be a bit smarter about what we can do and learn from all the findings of our friends who are sharing this wisdom with us today. So with that, I would give the floor to Ulrich to present himself.
Say Mirela, ladies first.
Oh. Okay, then hi from my side as well. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here, and thanks for dedicating your lunch break. I am Mirela Creder. I am a mediator. Originally, I studied international business, so I'm quite familiar with B2B scenarios. I am also an organizational psychology consultant, which adds up to the whole triangle of business, of mediation, of the psychology of communication. And yeah, in the meantime, I also give trainings, coach, and do workshops like this one. I'm very happy to be here, and yeah, handing over to Ulrich.
Yeah, thanks, Mirela. I'm Ulrich Hagel. I have studied law and business administration for more than 20 years. I'm now in-house counsel in a global player in the railway industry, formerly known as Bombardier Transportation. Now we have been taken over by Alstom. Besides being the in-house counsel, I'm a trained mediator and practice as a mediator and attorney. And I'm also the founding member and a board member of the Roundtable Mediation and Conflict Management of the German industry. And Mirela and I, we would like to share a bit of our knowledge in negotiations and what we as mediators can bring into negotiations to make them more successful. With that, I hand over to you, Jean-Christophe, with the first question to the audience. Oops.
Nothing like that.
I hope you can,
your poll?
Can you see the poll?
No.
Maybe just a quick intro, because we know there are also many mediators probably among us, but we are not sure. So we want to know that, of course. We also want to know what your background is. So when we are talking about the topics, we want to, of course, address it to like where you stand, what you already do, what you know, and would like to also, of course, if there's a chance, get information from your perspective as well. So in the first stage, like just to know where you are from, what your background is, would be awesome if you could share that with us in this poll. Okay, so we're going. I
see some movement. That's good.
Yeah, so many lawyers, it seems, business people, and academics. So
we have 80% participation.
So many lawyers and many business people. So I assume this will be interesting discussion. But then
Good mix.
We can't see the results, Mirella.
You will see it in a
We have
second.
to. We will.
Oh, okay,
we
okay.
will. We'll show you. We are just following this here, and we'll show it to you in a sec.
Good comment by Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks.
We can include.
It was me, Jean-Christophe, I think,
Beatrice?
for the results.
Okay. Can you see the results now, or?
No,
Okay, now share results.
now I can see it. Yeah.
So, okay, many people from business, many lawyers, no psychologists. Okay, so I'm the only one, which is interesting though, and yeah, awesome. Okay.
And important, the very large majority are all trained mediators.
Yeah.
I can't see that.
Can't see that either, but it's like, yeah,
If
I'm
you
a trained
scroll
mediator.
down.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm a trained mediator. Awesome. Okay, super. And that was important for us to know because since we only have an hour and a half, and we want to, of course, then not bore you with all the details. We would have maybe done it a bit more if we would have known that there are many people who haven't heard of mediation yet so much. But since we addressed, I guess, the target group in that sense, this is good. I think we had another poll.
Do we?
No,
not at present.
Okay, so we would start with mostly since, as we saw, you are all familiar with the topic, of course. So you've been in many negotiations, I assume, on whichever end, and we would like to know from you why, in your experience, do negotiations fail? Why did they fail in the past? What are, in your knowledge and perception, the most common negotiation mistakes? But also what are hurdles which when you wanted to successfully negotiate, you had to overcome or you didn't overcome. And for that, we would actually start with a quick breakout session, just to also share the experiences. And then afterwards would ask you just to share with us either in like directly telling us or in the chat, what were your outcomes for this question in the discussion together.
So I will be creating 7 breakout rooms because we're a large group of people, and please discuss it amongst each other. We'll just do it a very quick tour of 3 minutes, and then maybe we can share all the findings in the chat, and that way I think we can all make progress in a transparent fashion. Open all rooms. Okay, looks like this is working.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, I'm lost. Where are we now?
We're back in the main room.
Already?
Yes.
Okay, so we didn't have time to talk about it. It was too short, three minutes.
So welcome back in the main room. If you now would like to share your findings on why negotiations fail in the chat, that would be superb, because that way our protagonists can actually build their workshop on that.
I'll just give it another minute. And yeah, I think it was also in our breakout room. It was cool to also be in the breakout room. It was actually a good experience, and I think I'm curious how everybody will respond if we all kind of nail it down to the same topic, or how the variety of it kind of has been experienced. Also, maybe if you share again the presentation, Ulrich, could you please share it again? Okay, so we have here lack of preparation, being the winner, typical hurdles. Moment, let's go back. Typical hurdles, lack of honesty, failure in cross-cultural understanding, lack of time and patience. People are not ready. There was something missing in the preparation. And again, not enough time, too focused on proper scope, strong egos, lack of empathy, lack of flexibility, overestimation of own strengths, too fixed on plan B if negotiations fail, and people stick to their positions. Yep, those are pretty much also the ones that we experienced in our breakout room, when it was very much, we forgot our common interest, and we focused a lot on the own interest, or we were running just too fast into an agreement. And the argument, which I also experienced a lot in business, is there is never enough time. There is no time. Let's go quickly. Let's not answer some questions, because we need to quickly have this this agreement, this contract done. So maybe we'll come back to that later also, but this is exactly what we are like today addressing, Ulrich and I. Exactly these topics on a quantitative and also qualitative level. So maybe also just in the chat, for if you want to, can you maybe go one further, please? The typical negotiation scenarios that you experienced. Maybe if you also want to just write down one sentence in the chat, or say what are the typical negotiation scenarios you encountered in your daily life, or in your business life, basically. So I'm just going over it, and if you have the minute, just share it with us. If we go to the next one. And did you think of including a mediator? So maybe just think about it, or maybe raise hands who actually thought about including a mediator. I don't see any. Can you go to the next slide? So there's nobody that thought about including a mediator. Okay, Matthias, you can see one hand. Okay, so maybe Matthias, at which stage before the negotiation?
No, that was when entering a negotiation at the second stage, when things seem very rusty in the process. And of course it was to no avail, because the people I was dealing with did not want a mediator. Okay. So I may have suggested it, but it's hard to convince people to get a mediator in.
Okay, that's interesting. So maybe also if you go to the next slide, so thanks for sharing this, and maybe exactly that. Also for everybody who didn't raise their hands, and also for Matthias, what you were saying, why not? Why, like maybe just either write it in the chat or share it quickly with us. What were the also their reasons why not to include a mediator, or why not even think about it in negotiation? Costs?
Well, why not? In my business, I'm working in the construction business, and the construction business, especially on the south side of Switzerland, in the Latin room, is maybe 20 years behind in terms of what mediation could achieve and what it should be perceived as.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Like I think especially at the stage of what you also like before, like when then the negotiation fails, that might be then a stage, and even there it's interesting that even there it's hard to convince to include a mediator. Lose of face. Okay, many don't know the advantage of it. Any other reasons? Just curious why this topic is then, why you also experience that mediation is not being chosen. Well, if you have any more thoughts, just share them with us in the chat. That would be awesome. We'll come back to that later. And so now, from the experience of Ulrich, mostly also here in that case, let's dig into what actually can happen when you include a mediator, and which mediation techniques can be used so that you can actually help your negotiations to be more sustainable and more successful. Ulrich. You have to unmute yourself, Ulrich, please.
That's a good hint. The system is doing that automatically.
Yeah, Jean-Christophe muted us. No, system did.
Just muting me off here. Okay, anyway, I just want to show two examples, and we were earlier talking about the negotiation scenarios, and two typical scenarios are contract negotiations, and the second one is dispute negotiations. And on both topics, I would like to show you one specific technique, or why it is good to include mediators into the negotiation. And on the first one, contract negotiation, imagine contract negotiation including a mediator means deal mediation. That's the term used for it. And the case study would be, think about a startup company. A couple of very innovative entrepreneurs want to join forces in a partnership. What do they typically do? In drafting the partnership agreement, they go to a lawyer and to ask the lawyer to set up the partnership agreement. And the lawyer usually is using boilerplate templates to do so. And after 2 years, the startup, the people split. And guess why? Because they found out that they had different contradicting expectations regarding the partnership. One of them just wanted to have a good job, wanted to have a lot of leisure time, and so on and so forth. The other one wanted to make the big money. After 2 years getting an investor, after 5 years selling the business for 3-digit million amount. So obviously that was contradicting, and it failed. And why did that happen? Because they just used standard techniques and were not looking into their expectations, their interests behind setting up such kind of partnership. So solution for a sustainable partnership agreement would be to identify the interests first regarding the partnership, and how these interests can be satisfied, if at all. It might also happen that it is not possible to satisfy all of the interests and expectations, and then it would be better not to enter into a partnership. But there might also be a lot of possibilities how to phrase and draft the partnership agreement in order to respect all the interests of the parties. And at least you have a better understanding of what the expectations are, and draft it accordingly. And based on all of that, then you can ask the lawyer to include all the expectations into the partnership agreement. And that would increase the likelihood of having a sustainable partnership agreement. And hopefully you don't split up after 2 years because you had different expectations. And that just shows this chronology, the sequence, the organization of the negotiation and the structure is very, very important. And if you look at the phases that were described here, that is exactly what a mediation is all about. Let's forget about the opening, but first you have to list down the topics where you need a solution for, or in this case, where you need a contract for. Second, you look into the interests behind all of that. Then you generate the options for the solutions, and thereafter you try to evaluate those options, and then you start the negotiation, and hopefully finally you sign the agreement, or you find out that the solution is not to enter into a partnership in our specific situation. So that already shows how in contract negotiation it might be helpful to use at least the structure of a mediation, but even better to use a third party helping you to identify the interests, because that is very often not easy. And if you do it by yourself, you get stuck immediately. That's the first one. The second one will go in much more detail. The second one is about a dispute situation and a negotiation in a dispute situation. The case study is about an oil platform, and I have to explain a little bit the contractual setup and the issue. So first of all, the contractual setup, there is a customer, a C Limited. This customer is buying 25 oil platforms from two companies. Company A is delivering 15, and B is delivering 10 platforms. Those two companies are in a consortium agreement, in a partnership agreement. They are jointly and severally liable towards the customer. Scope split between the two is that both are responsible for designing different parts of the platform. So A, for example, is responsible for the accommodation container of the platform. B is responsible for the development of the drilling equipment. However, when the platforms are designed, both companies manufacture complete platforms. Now, under the partnership agreement, there is a dispute resolution clause and a couple of further clauses. What is important for us to understand is that each party is responsible and liable for its scope. The party who has delivered the respective platform will rectify defects of such platform. The costs of the rectification shall, however, be borne by the party being responsible for the defect, having caused the defect. So, for example, if it's a design defect, the designer has to assume the costs. If it is a manufacturing defect, whoever did that manufacturing is responsible for bearing the costs. There is a dispute resolution clause. ICC arbitration is agreed in case negotiations fail. Now, we do have a problem in the accommodation containers there. We have a leakage. Water is getting into the containers, and what we have is water ingress in the floors of the containers. So in the rooms, they have wooden floors, and water is coming in, and this water is damaging the floor. So that's the issue. And now we have, at the end, we have rotten floors in there. And the customer is now claiming from the consortial partners the rectification of the floors. So the partner claims the repair of all 25 oil platforms. Partner A, who is responsible for the design of those containers, refuses defects liability, says, I'm not going to do anything. This is not a defect. We will come to the arguments in a minute. Partner B has looked into it a bit more in detail and has decided to repair all 25 platforms because it's a joint and several liability. Then they have spent 5 million for doing so. B is turning to A saying, well, you have done the design of the containers. You are responsible for the defect. So please pay me back the 5 million I spent. And A rejects the claim. So this is a typical claim negotiation scenario, I assume. And what happens there after having written first letters? The parties usually come to a table in order to exchange their arguments. In our case, A is sitting at the table with the following arguments, says there is no defect, the damages are caused by C. When C was cleaning the rooms with the water got into the floor, and that was the, the reason for the rotten floors. They also say, well, if there is a defect, it is definitely not a design defect. They also say, well, if I'm responsible, please remember, we do have a clause under our consortial agreement that our liability is capped at 1 million euro. So if you get any money, it will not be more than 1 million. And last but not least, A is arguing that the claim of B would be time barred, and thus B repaired it without any legal obligation. And if B does so, A is not responsible for paying anything. Those are typical arguments in such kind of negotiation. Then B has for sure a different opinion. They say, no, there is a defect, and it is a design defect caused by you, A. The liability we have agreed on under our contract is not applicable in warranty situations. That would be a disaster, because otherwise you always force the other party to repair it, and then you are limited by 1 million. That can't be the case, so it does not apply. And last but not least, it's not time barred. There had been negotiations which suspended the time barrage. That is the arguments that are exchanged in the typical negotiation of such a claim. Now, out of a sudden, in that negotiation, A offers to settle for 1.2 million euro. And the question for B in that negotiation is, well, should I accept the 1.2? Who of you would accept the 1.2 million in that scenario? Unfortunately, I cannot see the screens. Do we have any hands raised? No, you don't. Nobody would accept it. Okay, fair enough. There are a couple of reasons. A lot say, well, I don't know. And the others say, it depends. And what does it depend on? You need more information. Yeah, and I give you a bit more information. B has done an evaluation beforehand. We were talking about preparation of negotiations. So B is well prepared for the negotiation, and has asked for an external expert opinion on the fact of the defects, looking into the technical details, specification, and so on and so forth. And it is, nothing is 100% clear, but with a likelihood of 80%, they are sure that this is a defect and it's not caused by the customer. They are also 80% sure it's a design defect. They have also asked the external lawyer about the argument of the liability cap, and the lawyer said, well, we have the better arguments, so therefore they said, well, 60% chance to win this one. And on time barrage, for sure negotiations have happened, but they have a bit of difficulties finding all the documents showing that, but they are hoping to find such documents, and therefore they still see a very good chance to win that argument as well. Based on that information, which you have gathered in preparation of the negotiation, now looking at the offer of 1.2 million, would anyone now say, based on those facts, yes, I would go for the 1.2? Any hands raised?
Not yet.
Not yet. So maybe you put in the chat, for which amount would you settle this case based on the information you have here at hand?
Observing. Matthias would suggest common expert advice.
Okay, so you would not settle, you would ask somebody else to look into it. Anyone give me a hint at which amount you would settle?
Seems like nobody wants to settle.
Everything over 1, 3, 4, 4. Oh, what a figure.
Okay.
Okay, let's see how you came to that figure.
Just to look
Okay.
to the PV from a different perspective. Which, Christoph?
1.8. Okay, good. Most of that is more or less guesswork anyway. I guess nobody is doing any informed decision here. And I would like to show you how you can get closer to it. And therefore, it might be good to have somebody who is able to lead you towards that decision. So again, that was the situation. Now, B would settle if the option to settle is more interesting than the alternative to it, to the settlement agreement. And what are the alternatives that B would have not settling the case? The first one is, what are the alternatives? The first one is B could waive the claim. I guess that is not a good alternative. So then you would take the 1.2 before you would waive the claim. Or you could go to ICC arbitration and get it decided by the arbitrators. That's the other alternative if you don't settle. I guess there are not many more alternatives unless you agree something with the other party, such as an expert opinion or whatever you were suggesting. Now, if you go to ICC arbitration, what is going to happen at the ICC arbitration? The judges would look at the case, at the arguments, and will take decisions on those specific topics based on the arguments, the law, the contract, and the evidence. And looking at that, what do they decide on? They first have to decide on whether there is a defect or not. Whether it's first or last, it doesn't matter. For my exercise, the sequence is not of importance. But they have to decide on whether there is a defect or not. If there is no defect, B will not get anything. If there is a defect, the question is, would any claim be time barred? And if it's time barred, B would not get anything again. Only if there is a defect and it is not time barred, they would raise the question, is it a design defect or any other kind of defect? If it's a design defect, the next question is, does the limitation of liability apply? If it does apply, B would only get 1 million. If it does not apply, B would get the 5 million, I agree, if the cost can be shown or proven. Okay. If there is no design defect, again, the question is, does the limitation of liability kick in? If it does kick in, again, B would only get 1 million. If it does not kick in, B would only get 3 million, which is the cost which was spent for the 15 oil platforms, which were under the responsibility of A. For the 10 of B, B would not get any cost compensation because it was not a design defect. So therefore, it was not caused by A. It must have been caused by the parties building the platforms. So those are the possible results in a arbitration, nothing else. This can be the results. Now you would have to think about your arguments, and B has done the preparation work and has put probabilities to all those arguments. So here you can see they have said that there is no defect, there is only a 20% chance. That it is time barred, a 30% chance, and so on and so forth. So they have put all the probabilities to the specific knots. Based on that, well, first of all, you would say, how do you come to a 60% or whatever percentage on a specific case? And even if you ask lawyers, you would normally not get any percentages in there. And we as a company are using such kind of decision trees for quite a while in the meantime, and we have gathered a lot of experience in doing so. For example, for booking our risk provisions or opportunities, also preparing for negotiations and so on and so forth. And at the beginning, we have always asked our lawyers to give us some figures, which we can then put into our calculation. And it was so hard. They always said we have the better argument. So I don't know what the responses were, but nobody told us 37.5% chance to win or lose. And then we said, well, okay, we have to develop a translator from lawyerish into business probabilities. And now we are asking two questions to our lawyers. The first one is, do we have a strong case, an open case, or a weak case with our argument? This can easily be answered. And if the lawyer, for example, hey, no, we have a strong case on this argument, for example, the defect or the limitation of liability, then we ask the second question as well. If you think about a strong case, is that up to a clear-cut case? Or is it more towards an open case, or is it just a typical strong case? That usually the lawyer can also answer. And if they say it's a typical strong case, that means to us it's 80% chance to win. That is how we translate the lawyerish into our business probabilities. And this is where the figures are coming from and how we determine the figures based on what we know at the time. And based on that, we calculate through the decision tree. And you can see the value of that claim is 1.7, I can't see the whole figure, but 1.7x million euro. That would be the average you would get out of arbitrations if you run, let's say you run 100 arbitrations, that would be the average. In none of the arbitrations, you would get exactly that amount because, as we have seen in the tree, you can only get 0, 1, 3, or 5. But in average, you would get something like that. This is how you calculate a value of a claim that you have. Now, based on that, again, let's look at probabilities, the risk spread. That's also an information that is important for you to know when you have to consider whether you want to settle or not. And we can see the chance to get nothing out of it is at a 44%, while you only have about 27% chance to get the total of 5 million. And that also gives you a good feeling whether to settle or not. And here you can see the value was at 1.7 million, so value is higher than the settlement proposal. And therefore, oh, my internet is getting unstable. I hope I'm not getting disconnected, otherwise I would dial in again. So that would give you a clear picture that obviously the proposal is or might not be good enough. That is what a lot still do in preparation. Now, next step, however, is if you have to go to arbitration, you would have investment costs to do so. From a business perspective, that needs to be considered at the same time. So what kind of cost would you have going there? You have administration cost, which is the Arbitration Institute, the ICC, plus the arbitrators. You would have usually external lawyers costs. It's not necessary to engage lawyers to run an arbitration, but in such kind of cases, almost everybody does. You would have transactional costs. That's your own people. That is additional efforts you have to do in order to make it happen. And you have a cost of missed opportunities because you are using your people not to generate value for the company, but to solve problems of the past. Especially in our case, it is a typical technical discussion. Your best engineers will be on that case instead of developing the next good product for your company. That all needs to be considered. And you have to put the costs in there. So in our case, you have costs for the ICC, for the arbitrators. Unfortunately, in the ICC, you always have a range of costs. But in such a case, you can be sure it will be the maximum cost. In all my cases at the ICC, we ended up at the maximum cost, even though for me, it's simple cases with 5 questions to answer. But it's always complex. And anyway, you have the high cost. But with the cost, you also have to ask yourself from a business perspective, who has to advance those costs? Who has to pay it? And under ICC arbitrations, both parties equally have to give the advance payment. And at the end, you have to ask yourself, do I get a cost reimbursement if I win that case, or will I be stuck with that cost anyway? Under ICC, you get at least, if you win the case, you get your cost reimbursed. And on the lawyer side, well, this figure is extremely low. This is just based on German RVG, which usually is not being applied in arbitrations, but just to give a figure here. And transactional cost, that's, as I said, the internal people that are using, that are working on the file, traveling costs, translation costs, all kind of stuff that is needed to make it happen. And costs of missed opportunity, I have not even calculated. Looking at all of that, you have more than 800,000 euro to be spent on that file, with a risk not to get the money back or to be stuck even if you win. That needs to be considered at the same time. So your decision tree at the end looks different. If there is no defect and you have got the decision by the arbitration, you have lost 800,000 euro. Yeah, you don't get the reimbursement, but on top of that, you have to spend another 800,000 euro. And if you completely win, you don't get the 5 million back. You still have to pay your 200, whatever it is, 1,000 euro. That is the cost you're not getting reimbursed. So that is the real picture of the case if you choose not to settle. And that means you would, the expected value at the end of that, after investment costs and considering reimbursements, the value would be at 1.515 million euro. And now looking at that again, now we are in a different ballgame, correct? The expected value is below the settlement proposal. So if you really run not a mediation, an arbitration, you would end up with less than what A has offered in the negotiation. And you also have to consider, even though the expected value is at 1.15 million, there is a risk of losing everything and having to pay another 800,000, and that risk is pretty high with the 44%. The chance to get more than the expected value is at 33%, and here to get more than the expected value. And the risk to get less than the expected value is at 66.4%. With all that information at hand, I guess your evaluation of the proposal of A to settle for 1.2 million would be different. And I would assume most of you would say, well, let's take the 1.2, let's not spend time and money for the ICC arbitration, and let's settle for that amount. So that's how you can approach it. Now, what has that all to do with mediation? That you can do in all the negotiations. I would tell you how I, as a mediator, are using that technique in a distributive negotiation. I'm building the tree together with the parties. What are the issues at stake? What are the exchanged arguments? And as we have seen, they have explained their positions. By looking at the positions and the argument and counter argument, it's clear which questions need to be decided. So the tree is built immediately with the parties, and I can help them in doing so. Then we go in private sessions, the so-called caucus sessions. In that, they have to evaluate the probabilities of the different knots. And we are raising the typical questions. Please list all exchanged and possible arguments and counter arguments for the respective knots. And after you have done so, based on such list, please evaluate the chances of success that you win your argument there. So that's what they do. And then we see the tree. Thereafter, I start with a reality check. Again, in the caucus session, not in the plenum. And very often I raise the question, has all been considered? Have you looked at the transactional costs? Have you looked at the interest? Have you looked at cash flow? Have you looked at I don't know what? Very often they say, no, we haven't considered that. Let's do it. Put it in there as well. Another one is, have the probabilities been evaluated correctly? There is never a correct, it's always subjective, no doubt about that. But applying again the two-question rule, Do we have a strong case, weak case? I can counter check whether the evaluation looks okay or not. And with that, I get a pretty good feeling, and they get a pretty good feeling what a real value estimation would be in that case. And I do that with both parties. For sure, they have different views on the probabilities. For sure, there is a different expected value on both sides. But they get more clarity about their BATNA in the negotiation situation. And I have kind of the helicopter view as a mediator. I see what their expected values are, considering investments, reimbursements, and so on and so forth. And I can move their BATNAs by doing the reality checks. And I can identify whether there is a potential SOPA or whether there is not, whether they are still too far away. And if I see that there is a SOPA or they are getting close to a SOPA, then it's a question of communicating with the parties what can be shared about it. And usually what they say is you can share whether you see a SOPA or not. Don't tell us where the SOPA is. And don't tell us how they evaluated the case or we evaluated the case. That is confidential. But if you see a SOPA, tell us. And if you do so and say, well, I see that there is a SOPA, in fact, they know they can settle the case. If I tell them, well, you are still a bit away, but you're very close to getting a common ground, they will also find that common ground, they will settle. If I can tell them, guys, you are so far away by that, it really takes a lot of effort. Probably it is better to go to arbitration or look into other alternatives, such as expert evaluation on specific topics in order to get more clarity, which might be binding on those topics. So this is how a mediator can support in a typical claim negotiation scenario on distributive negotiations. Okay, with that, I guess, Mirella, I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, and I just thanks. And I want to quickly go back to the beginning, because that is exactly, I think, from a factical point, very interesting to see how many costs, because when we had before, or when you were doing the poll, and also when you were discussing the reasons why negotiations fail, or why not to include a mediator, it was often the question of its cost, or also we don't know about the process. Yeah, we don't know the advantages. So what was really nice to see from what you were also presenting, Ulrich, was exactly the process is very similar, like a negotiation and mediation. It's just a similar process. And also from the cost at the end of the day, if you as a mediator, oh, there's another poll coming up. Do you see that? So just so that I know how I should now proceed, maybe if you would just quickly, cool, awesome. So yeah, okay. At least until now, nobody really falling asleep. We have this poll here asking if it's informative, if everybody's fine, or if it's getting boring. So I'm happy that nobody's bored yet, as it seems, and nobody is asleep. And for everybody who's having lunch on the side, bon appetit. So yeah, so basically, I just before I move on to the other sorry, I'm sometimes a little distracted if I see the poll in front of me. Wanna actually go into all these points that you also mentioned, because that's why we also asked in the beginning: are there many business people in the room? Are there lawyers? Are there psychologists? And interestingly, because I myself have worked in a big energy corporation for a long time, I'm still cooperating there a lot. So I really hear what you also said before. There's not enough time to actually discuss, or there is I don't know, the people side is often excluded, and often we really look at the facts, we look at the positions, the arguments, but all of you, and I think I'm the only psychologist as it seems here, however, actually mentioned the negotiations fail mostly due to people topics. Yeah, of course, some is time, some is cost, or some is also, but often it's what you also said, you know, being like not really understanding of the other side's interest, or being not curious, or having a lack of empathy or a big ego. Also the intercultural topics, so we'll get to that. But so as we saw, having a mediator in the room can actually look into these things. And now when we looked at when to include a mediator, spoiler alert, rather sooner than later. And I think also what Matthias said before, eventually you think about it, but when the negotiation is already in process, it can be then quite tricky. Can you move one sheet further, please? So again, looking at exactly what also Ulrich said before, the Batna and Vatna. So when we are in a negotiation, and like here now, when we're focusing on B2B, but also in your negotiation, you have the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and you have the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement, and the zone of possible agreement actually between the parties. And often we're looking at it from a very factual position. We have our negotiation lines, and we actually come, as you also said before in the poll, with our own interest, with our own position, and often also with our own agenda. If you move on.
Can I add something on that
slide,
Mirella?
Please, of course.
Well, what can be seen in that graph here is the satisfaction with the result. And A would be satisfied with the result where A has not to pay anything. And the higher the amount of payment goes, the lower the satisfaction with the result would be. To the contrary, on B side, the more B get reimbursed, the more satisfaction with the result is on the side of B. And in the negotiation, what typically happens is you don't talk about this level of satisfaction. What you sometimes do is you talk about the walkaway positions. If I don't get more than that, negotiation is over, we meet at arbitration. The same on the other side. If I have to pay more than that, no way, you will not get it from me. Let's get the case decided. And those scenarios which are expressed in the negotiation usually are not the real bottom lines the parties have. There is always a buffer in there. And that is meant by the negotiation lines here. So the real satisfaction level is never shown in the negotiation. It is always below or above the line. And those mentioned communicated lines and bottom lines usually don't show a SOPA at the end, yeah? And that is the real problem. And we have seen that earlier in our poll. People have said lack of honesty in the negotiations. That is exactly what happens here. And if you talk to the mediator, you will never be 100% honest, that's for sure. There's still tactics, confidentiality, I don't know what. But you are more honest than to the negotiation party. And at least the lines move just by talking to the mediator, not to the other side. In caucus sessions, these lines move. And if those lines move, obviously the SOPA is being identified. The SOPA, which was not there in the negotiation situation, gets a SOPA in the mediation, at least in the caucus sessions. And then it's a question of how the mediator can help the parties to really identify themselves the SOPA at the end of the day. With that, back to you, Mirella.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, this is exactly the next slide where which I needed or wanted for that. But yeah, that's exactly what you say. And I personally in the mediation, I'm still kind of, I love to use my iceberg. So basically, and it's pretty much the same thing. You come with the positions, and the deeper you go, I mean, I use the probably to all of you known, I assume, and who doesn't, please just leave a comment. It's the same scenario that you have like two icebergs. We both come with two positions, and eventually they intervene. And the more you go down into really not just the positions, but the interests, the needs, and what actually the hidden information there might be, the agenda, the hidden agenda. The more you go down, the more you might even then find this common zone of interest, this common part of actually from which you can then work back up. And this is exactly what the mediator can help, because if you are, let's say, from a rather maybe then negotiation fact-based position coming in for, you don't want to share many things. You don't want to share your agenda. It's also fear-based to some extent, but also just your tactics. So here a mediator can then, and I guess most of you know, but also when you need to then promote it to negotiating parties, the mediator can really help to basically use this information and in a more safe way share it also, or at least see and work towards then this SOPA. And also here, this is pretty much similar, but Ulrich, if you want to add something to that slide.
Yeah. If we look at maybe the previous slide, if we take those lines that are communicated in the negotiation, the BATNA would be here, because that is the bottom line where you would not settle any longer, and the BATNA of the other side would be here.
Exactly.
And if we can move that to closer to the real lines of satisfaction and the real bottom lines, we move the BATNAs in a different direction. And by that, we can then hopefully identify SOPAs. Okay.
And what we now talked about a lot was those, let's say, I call it somehow hard factors. I know they are not only like hard factors in negotiation, but often, and this is, I think it comes from your statements from before, when you were all telling us what actually your experiences were with failing negotiations, but also from our experiences, the rather non-obvious soft spots underlying reasons, and those were rather qualitative. So coming from my side, more with the psychology of negotiation. And so what we saw, you don't need to be a psychologist to actually know all that, because I understood that those were the reasons why many negotiations failed. If we can move on.
Sure.
So we said before, we have the key challenges and the key factors in negotiation. So, and those are, and you also mentioned them before, the preparation. If you're not prepared enough, if you haven't figured out your correct BATNA, if you don't really know what your objectives are, you need a strategy, you need your rhetorics, you need a structure in the process of negotiation. So those are key, and you have to maintain them during a negotiation. But also you have the listening skills that you need to be aware of, or that you need to know. I call it mind your manners. So you have all the topic around respectful nonviolent communication, consensual negotiation, the open-mindedness, and also just finding a common ground. And you can, I think, on both sides add a lot, but we see that you have these rather obvious hard facts like preparation, strategy, structure, and you also have the rather soft skills, which comes with communication, listening, empathy, as you mentioned before, also curiosity, which can be limited. We can go to the next. So I always like to focus, and in any kind of negotiation, on all these, I call it people topics. We are all human. We are all, we are not calculators per se. We are in general also emotionally loaded. There is a dynamic between us. We have triggers, we have subjective perceptions and bias. So the communication is complex, and every time you're in a negotiation as a party, and this is not necessarily like as a mediator, but as a party, and even as a party, if you are a mediator, if I'm as a mediator in a negotiation, I have a different hat. So as you also mentioned before, I think it was this, what did you say? It's hard to be in a double role, even as a mediator negotiating. The moment you are in a double role, it's really hard sometimes to switch. And so sometimes you're lost in translation. Not everybody is able to to speak the language in the same way. If you have international negotiation, then you might have parties from different countries, which all come with a different level of, let's say, English. If your negotiation language is English, this can actually be quite tricky. Transmission, how the sender receiver, how the message is understood. The guilt trip, so I call it a guilt trip. It's basically who is like guilty in the sense of like who has maybe not done in the past or not delivered, or whose fault it was, like Ulrich explained before, if there is some defect, you know. So yeah, Ulrich?
Yeah, I just want to add on that for us,
Yes.
it's the typical blame game that we have there. It was your fault doing that. No, I only did that because you did this and that. And then you start this cycle of blaming each other, which is not helpful to solve it at the end.
Exactly. And this is also then kind of a topic of attitude, of mindset, but it all boils down in how you communicate afterwards, how you address, how you negotiate. Negotiation is nothing else than a discussion, which actually has, at the end of the day, needs an outcome, needs a result. Yeah. So also there, listening, like how often does it happen that we are listening? And I mean, I think we all know that too well to respond, because in a negotiation, especially if you're sitting with a friend for a coffee, well, of course you listen because you want to understand, you want to hear. If you're in a negotiation, you come with your agenda and you already prepare your argument the moment the other person is speaking. Cross-cultural differences, if you have countries that are just simply set in a different way, negotiate differently, have a different hierarchy understanding. Also the individual selective perception, we all come with that. We all have this kind of filter. So we actually are not, we might not even be aware, but it just happens. And you also have intuition versus logic. So the communication per se is a complex issue when you are in a negotiation, and that happens even if you are in a B2B negotiation, because at the end of the day, around the table, it's people and not machines and not computers. Also who is negotiating, because if you are in a negotiation and like you have to see who's around the table, and that can also very much change the dynamic of the negotiation. If there is people in the same positions, you know, do you have the same role? Is there somebody sent as a mandate with an order? So even like there, it's then again with the Batna and Batna situation and coming to the SOPA and moving, you know, along these lines. If you come and you have an order and maybe your career depends on getting that, making that deal, you just also in that sense completely differently would admit certain things or make a step towards the other. Power balance and manipulation, I experienced that a lot also in especially in business. That happens, that you have to that this is happening, and then you can't really balance it out together. Information gaps resulting, for example, from these orders, from the mandate, from the role. You don't have this information, and if you can't deliver this information in time, the other party, if you are like just as two parties in a room, might not allow you or be willing to let you get some information, make a break, but maybe will use it against you, you know, because of course they want to, if they're not in the consensual mode, win, which results in comparative disadvantages. Language skills, we said before. Bye, Matthias. Matthias needs to leave. Quickly, I'm interrupting for saying bye. And also the reflection, self-reflection capability. Again, we're just humans. We are coming with our own personality, our experiences, and not everybody is either in the mood to self-reflect or has the capability in that sense. So often we react out of a reflex. We communicate out of a reflex. So also the person who is actually negotiating plays a major role in how the negotiation goes, as much as it needs to be professional and goal-oriented, but we are sometimes just even a big blocker to ourselves. So again, emotions, how to handle those, heuristics, the whole cognitive portfolio, assumptions, interpretations, and all these topics actually play a major role. Can we move on? So boiling that down into the common mistakes in negotiation, what you probably also mostly collected it here, said is that you have a non-effective communication, that you end up having a compromise. So at the end of the day, you'll meet each other again at the negotiation table, maybe, or in front of court, or in arbitration. It might get more and more expensive in the future. So because you're not with a consensus, ended up with a consensus, you will maybe not have the real structure in the process, like we saw before, how the process should actually go. But if you have all these disruptions in the communication process, you might not really follow the structure that would actually get you to a successful end of the negotiation. You might lose focus because you're starting to set the wrong priorities. And also there are people having hard times to handle objections, which then is for you as the other party quite tricky. If you want to win, or you try to prove a point, the chicken run, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with that word, but this is actually when nobody wants to make the first step. Nobody wants to give in. Like if, for example, you have a certain information that would really help, you know, or like a concession, but you don't want to be the first one to do it. So this is called a chicken run. So who basically jumps first, you know, or who breaks first. So those topics, if you are alone in mediation, can really develop a bad dynamic. Wrong timing, wrong anticipation, lack of curiosity, we had it, or also the weight of past deals. Ulrich said before that you have two ways of negotiating. You have one, the deal closing, the let's say contractual, but also the conflictual. So sometimes you want to get to a contract, but you already have the past, like a past deal that didn't work out. So you still kind of have all this, let's say, heritage of and the weight of these maybe past bad experiences. So you can't really find a way back into that. Ending up in also a lack of moderation and facilitation, since you are, as you said before, also in a role, and it's hard sometimes to step out of your role and to take a step back and to actually support the negotiation. And so here, maybe going back to what also Ulrich said before, and there you can also fill in when you look at the topics, when you are as a negotiator very skilled in communication, and when you are really trying to get to a consensual negotiation, you can use all these. However, a mediator would actually, in that case, help you. And that's why we said when to include a mediator, and it would really be, in that sense, helpful from the beginning, because maybe when you have this topic of over-optimism, yeah, you can, as Ulrich explained before, go into the risk analysis, but somebody who actually moderates it for you, helps you to structure the process, helps you to actually also, like when you have this illusion of superiority, do a SWOT, but exactly in individual sessions, because nobody wants to really admit their weaknesses necessarily in front of the other party. So, I mean, of course, we can admit our strength or the perceived strength because we have maybe this illusion of certainty, this illusion of superiority. But in individual sessions, one-to-one meetings with a mediator, you can work through these and can see what actually would help you to get the negotiation forward. The framing, the mirroring, because often you're so much in your head, and of course can't really see that. Let's look at also what I said before, this kind of need for reciprocity. There's this concession, there's this chicken run, you know, also there. See actually what's the BATNA, what's actually factual. I mean, how much can you actually get out of it? Are you realistic in your expectations? Ulrich, do you want to add something here to the anchoring, maybe?
Yeah, the anchoring, well, in negotiations, usually you enter negotiations by anchoring with a very high amount or a very low amount. It depends on which side you are. And the only thing that helps against anchoring is having information. We are usually making, well, in my classes, I usually make the example, please tell me how many inhabitants has Turkey. Yeah, and I give them figures, is it more or less than, and the groups are different. And depending on what I gave as a figure at the end, the evaluation or the assumption of the people is completely different. The only thing that helps to really tell me how many inhabitants Turkey has is I know it. Yeah, I've looked at the facts, I know it. And that is what a mediator can bring to the table. Not that the mediator knows how many inhabitants Turkey has, but he can really go into, please, what is the reasoning behind your number? And also tell the people, look at your button. You have said, if that is the case, I walk away. Why would you now settle for such an amount if you have said different before? So this reflection, the mediator can add as well. And this is helping to fight such kind of tactics in negotiations, such as anchoring and all the rest of it.
Moving on to the next. And this is exactly basically closing into, if you have a mediator, it allows the parties actually to gain a more accurate and a more complete picture of the topic of interest or of the discussion of the dispute of also the contractual matters. And it creates a dialogue, and that can happen, as you said before, like through the shuttle mediation, you know, if you do the one-on-one meetings, or also, and this is something which I like to do a lot and has proven very helpful, especially in intercultural and international negotiations, that you have even co-mediators, that not necessarily only one person, but if you have different cultural backgrounds, also language issues, which can prevent the negotiation from actually going into the right direction, or which creates misunderstandings, having two mediators from exactly like the backgrounds of the parties, that can help. So that even in that context, you have this, like you said before, you had this translator, a lawyer versus business, and now you have again the translator, you know, party to the other party, country, other country, and which brings us to the next. And also there, you leave the responsibilities. It boils down to leaving the responsibility of the solution at the end with the parties. I mean, you're all responsible and you know your stuff, but you're in a way relieved of the burden to moderate and structure everything. And it helps you to really focus actually on the negotiation. So what you said before, again, coming back to the double role, it can really give you a certain freedom as a negotiating party, because you know there's somebody else in the room who will balance things out if they go into the wrong direction. Next, please. And here we come to another point, because we had that before, and I also call that like there are different ways. I made self-medication into self-mediation, so, and its limitations. It can help. We are all mediators. We are all negotiators. We are business people, lawyers, and so forth. Self-employed. I heard before, many of us as well. So basically, we all try to already come consciously into negotiations with the consensual approach, with and I can say from myself, I mean, whenever, and that might be in a business negotiation, that might be even in personal friendships, relationships, and so on. As a mediator, you're in a way already coming with the right mindset, and that's already the advantage if you are a mediator and if you have this mediation mindset. However, if you are in a different role, in a different position, and you need a different result, it's hard sometimes to switch between that. I mean, you can, and it's always helpful if you bring in all these qualities, all these skills, and it will always make the negotiation more rich and will help to make it more successful and also more sustainable. However, it sometimes will then also, it's very hard to maintain this to maintain the structure sometimes, and it's also, on the other hand, sometimes hard to be accepted from the other party like that, because in my experience, often when you are part of a party and you try to mediate, the other party might still get into all these kind of ego situations, into all these blockers from the other side. You still need to try to close the deal, or you might not be able to reveal your own topics. So as a mediator, self-mediating in a negotiation can be tricky. What you said before, and I call it informal mediation, I think Matthias, who already left, said that we do use mediation techniques without the name, so we don't name them. And this was what I do a lot, and what I also actually before I became a trained mediator. Actually, that was what got me there. That I heard about it, I learned. I was like, that I'm actually doing it all the time. I just did not know that it was actually a word, that it had a name. So that's why it also helps training people just to learn these different negotiation techniques, which are consensual. However, there are limitations to trying to mediate yourself, and it can help you when you are part of a negotiation team or party to have a third independent party to do that for you.
I have actually an example for that, if I may, Mirella.
Absolutely.
Often in board of directors, there's big decisions that need to be taken. It's extremely emotional, and typically either the president of the board or somebody who has maybe a mediation background will try to, or be asked to intervene and try to settle something between two roasters who are getting onto each other. That typically is really difficult because they are not mediators, and they cannot work as mediators because they're all part of the same board. And so that's another example of why it's important to bring in a neutral. Call them whatever you want, but it needs to be somebody neutral outside of that body that is understood and that also respected for the person's thought leadership to try to deal with that situation. And that's exactly that case of a lot of times board members say, oh, we mediate the conflict and the dispute amongst ourselves. Wonderful. But sometimes it's simply not working because they are part of the same body and cannot detach themselves because they are elected as such. And you cannot undo that just for the sake of the negotiation that is going on.
I would also like to add there, because I think that's a very important topic. And somebody said earlier at the beginning that the parties didn't want to go to mediation. And often they say, well, we can negotiate ourselves. We are experienced in doing so. We are trained in doing so. And even worse, if the parties are trained as mediators as well, then absolutely they have the impression they can structure it, they can handle it, they can solve it themselves. It is very good to have all those skills, but as we say, it has limitations. And I showed earlier on that most of in dispute negotiations, very often the lack of honesty, the tactics is there. Nobody is showing the cards they have, and so on and so forth. However, they are able to show it to the mediator. And if the parties are trained mediators, they will still not be able to look into the cards of the other side. It's impossible. Nobody would show it. And they will not show it to the other side as well, because there might be the arbitration coming as a next step. And therefore, again, it helps to structure, to do a lot of techniques, but there are limits. No caucus sessions, no possibilities to really get to the bottom and to get to the true story at the end of the day. And therefore, a third party might really help to facilitate in that situation. Back to you, Mirella.
No, I'm super happy that you mentioned that, because it actually goes also back to, interestingly, these what I said in the beginning, like the obvious and the rather not so obvious things. And I didn't even mention it, like in the sense of we all, like many mediators in the room, and so the neutrality is kind of a given, but it's so important sometimes even to mention again the obvious, to really highlight the obvious sometimes again, because this is exactly what often is being forgotten about. The neutrality is one major thing, and I can say from experience from my personal life, and I might and I assume that some of you can relate. This has now nothing necessarily to be with B2B and business, but it's always transferable because it's the same thing. I remember in my own relationship that sometimes, like when you get into a dispute, into a fight, into a discussion, even like, and then you kind of boil up and everything. And then I once remember we had a situation where I got my partner said, but you are a mediator, you know, and you are trained in that. So I would expect you. And I was like, yeah, but I still have my own emotions. And if I'm in the situation, right now, I don't put on my mediator hat immediately. I might be then coming back from it sooner, and I might be able to reflect eventually, and then maybe in the long run, save the day. But in that moment, I'm sometimes then also completely forget that I'm actually I need to manage my own emotions. I need to manage my own interests. So it's then hard to be have the mediation skills or like activate them in that moment when you are overwhelmed and when you are actually in the middle of this situation with your own position. So that's why that is an important topic to consider. Choosing the mediator is not only about having a mediator, but also which mediator to choose. And I think also this is sometimes forgotten, because we say a mediator needs to be neutral. A mediator does help to facilitate, but does not need to know about the matter. I remember I was, when I'm working for the energy supplier, there often are negotiations when it comes to contracting, when it comes to even building big plants, so like the tenders and everything. So, there are, and then it's sometimes you need this reality check, and you need somebody who actually knows what they are speaking about, even as a mediator, or the mediator needs to know what you are speaking about to help you to facilitate. And this is often overlooked, that you actually have somebody who, yes, has the communication skills, who has the mediation skills as a mediator, but actually completely lacks the context. Completely, it needs to clarify for him herself even more than between the parties. So, and also I think when it comes to acceptance of the mediator, I think Jean-Christophe, you had a beautiful example there. If you want to mention that,
there's a nice German word for that, Stallgeruch. Either you bring the Stallgeruch, okay. Or if you don't come from that stable, well, it'll be really difficult to find sufficient acceptance by the parties that are struggling with that dispute, and you won't be accepted. And that can happen, unfortunately, if the person is not well chosen. So I think one thing that can help is choosing a co-mediator, but the best is really to have somebody who's familiar with the context, who understands, who's credible with the people. Because, for example, if you work in a dispute involving a supplier of rolling stock bogies, and you have the company that needs to integrate that, and there's a dispute B2B, and the person that is called upon as a neutral or as a mediator does not understand the different type of bogies out there in the market, it's going to be really difficult to be respected by the engineers who are behind that, because it's their daily business. And so it's really important to be credible. Ulrich, do you want to double down on that?
Well, you mentioned more or less the example, because we have done a survey in our company on all the mediations that we had done in the past. And we also raised questions regarding the mediator. And there was exactly that answer coming, saying, well, the moment the mediator asked us, can you please explain what a bogey is? The mediation was done for us, because we had the impression he does not even know what we are talking about here. So there is no chance to settle anything with that guy. So that is explaining a little bit what is needed to make the parties happy with the mediator.
Yeah, and basically what you're mentioning is one big topic, and I think that we can close with that, is also trust, because often between the parties there is no trust, as you said. Sometimes it might happen that there is not even trust in the mediator. There can be trust, if the negotiation goes well, and then maybe you might not need all that. But at the end of the day, it can facilitate one way or another. It can de-escalate very much, but you need this acceptance, you need this trust also when choosing the mediator. And this is super, super important. So also for all of us, if we are as mediators getting into negotiations and trying to push this topic also forward, I think it can also help to know also kind of your fields of where you're actually brilliant at, and actually even also be a good mediator in the fields of your own expertise and knowledge that can actually help. Yeah, so That's yeah, we can just quickly at the end, we gave you two book recommendations, of course, on reference, but maybe you want to say something to this one?
Yes, sure. I was talking about this oil platform case earlier on, and I've published an article in this book, which is called Liquid Legal. It's not a mediation book, but it has a lot of good articles in there. And my article is about the value add of a legal department in a dispute, making a business case rather than providing pure legal advice. And it contains a lot of what I've said today. It's not on mediation, but it is to the point.
Mm-hmm. And the other one I added in here, it is in German. So for all our German-speaking participants, or actually it's from Linde Verlag in Austria, and it was published by very dear colleague and friend of mine, Ulrich Wanderer. And he brought together many established and experienced mediators who then added articles and chapters regarding also in that context from, for example, my colleague Gerda Rupi-Lang, commercial mediation, commercial conflicts, which can help a lot, and also very practical. It's a practical based book for mediators and mediating persons, but also in negotiations. So if you want to check that out, I think that can help. Yeah, so we're at the end of the presentation. We would have maybe last slide.
Is there a last slide? Sorry.
There was one, but now it's gone. No problem. It was just our faces, and now we're here anyhow. So okay. Yes, it's always like in with many participants, and in only 1.5 hours. It's a broad topic, and so it's then sometimes more webinary than workshopy. But I'm very happy that you participated. We have a few like last minutes. If there's anything on your part of the participants that you would want to further discuss, because we can gather again and discuss these topics even more. If you have something very from your own experiences to add, or any questions, come now. Or
I mean, we're fortunate to have the platform of Swiss B2B mediation community. So engage, send an email if you want me to add you to we have a WhatsApp chat where we share information specifically on B2B mediation. And I would suggest that maybe we can share your emails, Ulrich and Mirella, for those who participated and are interested. Our plan is to also make the presentation available to you who participated. Well, since we've recorded the session, we'll try to also offer that in a timely fashion. And I just would like to express my big gratitude to Mirella and to Ulrich for having made the time with us today. There's 3 things I really, that I take with me today. One is the cost of missed opportunities. That's so crucial and often, unfortunately, not sufficiently addressed. Talking about the different levels of satisfaction. How difficult is that? Not at all. We should all be doing that. And I just love the mention of the chicken run. Since we all have to run with all our other things that are happening. Thank you so much again for everybody who shared the time here. And let's stay in touch. I will put my email in the chat so you can reach out to me. I'll put it with the STM email because I don't have an SKWM one anymore. And if you want to stay on and speak with Ulrich or Mirella, feel free to do so. Yeah. I will have to drop off because I have another call that starts in a minute.
Thanks so much for having us, and to all of you, thanks so much for having been here, and looking forward to staying in touch, and looking forward to promoting more the role of mediation in negotiations in the B2B and any other context.
Okay, thanks a lot to everyone.